Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I want to welcome you to Lessons from History's Most Purposeful Companies. Our presenter today is an alum, Roger Mader. He's co-founder and CEO of Ampersand, and he brings to us his experience as Global Chief Marketing Officer for the world's largest franchise restaurant enterprise. And he'll share 3 tips, I love tips, don't you, that can unlock the potential for your organization during this presentation. So I'm going to hand over the mic to Roger. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Thank you, Antonio, Megan, and Ben for joining in on the hometowns. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. I am a 1984 alumnus of what was the CAS, now is the it earned a name somewhere along the lines.
Weinberg.
Oh yeah, the Weinberg College. Thank you very much, Lucy. My son has just graduated from Weinberg, as a matter of fact, so I should have recalled that. And I wrote this book on Purposeful Enterprise and want to share with you some of the legacy of other companies that have made a difference by being about something more than profit. And many organizations have the same challenge of being very clear and articulate about why they matter in the world and why people should pursue them with passion. Let me start by saying that in addition to being an alumnus, I am the CEO of Ampersand, an innovation consultancy based primarily in the US. And in that context, I helped do a turnaround of Subway, the restaurant group. They were shrinking in the as they moved into the aughts. And so now they are in that turnaround. We've just been acquired by private equity, and I had the real privilege of helping the CEO with that effort by serving as the Global Chief Marketing Officer. As a result, I've also launched Myra Media, which helps marketing officers around the world. And I teach as a professor at Dalhousie University here in Nova Scotia in the MBA program. I teach complexity theory, and at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, where I've been for the last 25 years, I teach a master's program in design strategy. This today, though, is going to take us to the beginning of the agricultural revolution and one of the oldest known cities. This is Çatalhöyük. It's in the Anatolian plain of Turkey, sort of a dry region now. It was a bit more temperate 9,000 years ago when this town of 10,000 people was formed, discovered only recently. It was a really interesting configuration because they actually got around by rooftop. So as a form of security, they basically had no external entrances other than a singular gate, and the walkways were all rooftops, which I had not seen prior to this formation. But one of the things that was found throughout this, throughout the archaeological site, was a fertility figurine, a goddess perchance. Looks very much like the Wittenberg angel, that is the same idea of a fertility goddess in the era of agriculture, where people came together and banded together for the first time and formed these agrarian metropoli. They were really beholden to the changes of the weather and the whims of nature, and so did their best to be able to try and take control of that, because it was the only way that they could perpetuate their living situation in what was described by Thomas Hobbes as a civilization that would be poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Now, imagine that world. Let's jump back to the last century and another leader who was quite purposeful, in this case, Winston Churchill, who oversaw the early fights in basically the overseas threat that came from Germany through the night raids. Unbeknownst to the Allies at the time, there was a camp called Auschwitz, which had a famous banner that said, "Work sets you free." And when the camp was liberated, among those survivors that were found was a young man named Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist, Austrian psychiatrist. His family had been annihilated in the camps, but he had made a study of his fellow inmates because he marveled at the disparity between those who were relatively young and healthy, those who were older and fragile, and that there didn't seem to be a predictor of who survived. Very often the older, fragile folks survived, and some of the young and healthy and robust withered away. What he found in his analysis of his fellow inmates was that those who survived appeared to have a stronger conviction to the future because they had reason to live. It was either to reunite a family or for some other typically very interpersonal reason that they had to go on living, for children that they'd been parted from, etc. And so his work, Man's Search for Meaning, is a study of this sort of survival instinct that comes from having a higher purpose than just oneself. Following the Second World War, we went through a period of almost 2 generations of remarkable Western growth, a consumer generation that was very different from what we saw during the first half of the 20th century. We saw in the United States the liberalization of civil rights. We also saw the aggregating impact on our social structures of the common good through pollution. This is the river I grew up near that caught on fire in school, to the sense that this is the Cuyahoga River, just out of Cleveland. And about that time, in 1970, Milton Friedman, noted Chicago economist, was quoted in the New York Times saying that the responsibility of business is to increase its profits. There had been this outcry about pollution and that sort of thing at the time, and so he was doing a response to that. Lucie, I saw you.
You're breaking up a bit.
Oh, interesting. Let me just check. That's strong Wi-Fi. I'm not sure why that would be. Check microphone. All right, let's see if this is better. I've just swapped microphones. Does it sound okay now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. So Milton Friedman, a noted economist, says businesses exist to increase their profits, which in principle made sense. Shareholders own the company is responsible to the shareholders are financial investors, deliver a profit. What we found in the subsequent years is the negative consequence of making an organization beholden to financial investors rather than strategic investors, those who have a real desire for the ongoing success of the enterprise. Lucie, I'm hearing some background feedback too. I wonder if you can mute the other participants. Yeah, no, it just muted you, it seems. Give me a thumbs up if you can still hear me all right.
It's still breaking up.
Okay, I'm going to try.
Try again, please.
Microphone's changed. Any improvement there? Okay, let's go with that. I'm now out of microphones. I'll have to put on headphones if that doesn't work. Milton Friedman said companies exist to increase their profits. And as a result, there were a number of organizations that continued to exploit the commons, because in order to be more profitable, they would maybe be less responsible to constituencies other than their shareholders, like the rest of us who live in the society that they're polluting or otherwise occurring. This young man, however, was a rock climber in the age before that was really a popular feat. He was also a maker, and he constructed his own equipment. And in a trip to, he was based in California, a trip to the UK, he found a really sturdy rugby jersey, literally the kind of canvas jersey that the teams would wear. And he brought a carton of them back to the US, and all of his buddy rock climbers wanted to buy them. And so he quickly sold out his inventory and started making his own. He then became the CEO of a business called Patagonia that was an outdoor, that it continues to be a very successful outdoor clothing an equipment maker and retailer. But Schuenald, this founder, went back on climbing excursions to really remote locations. And over time, what he noticed was he would get to this rocky outcropping where supposedly no person had ever set foot before, and he'd find an empty Coca-Cola can or some other sign of human detritus. And he realized that we are our own, worst concierge of the planet. And so as we destroy nature, we destroy ourselves, which he viewed as a very self-punishing act, and he wanted to invert that to becoming a protective act. And you may know that he recently delivered all of his shares of Patagonia into a trust so that the company, although it's still a for-profit company, all profits go towards activities that are to reduce the impact on nature and promote sustainability. That's about putting your money where your mouth is. Here's a really good example. The three founders of a grocery store. It was a food collective in Austin, Texas. And as it began to grow by 1978, they called it the Whole Foods Market. And everyone who worked there was a volunteer, and they barely got by. The founder and his girlfriend lived above the store. But unfortunately, one day in 1981, there was a massive flood in Austin, and it flooded the store. And he finally threw his hands up and said, that's it. We've done everything we can to keep fresh produce available to our local community, and we can't make it work. And he went downstairs, and in this It's a Wonderful Life moment, he got downstairs to start throwing out the ruined produce and found the entire town in the store in rubber boots, mopping it up and salvaging the inventory, because it was so incredibly valuable to them that they had local access to these foods, that they were willing to commit themselves to it. And he changed that day from his own self-described communist hippie roots to recognizing that the only way he could deliver on the promise of his organization was to make a profit, so that he could actually protect the investment and grow it over time. And thus Whole Foods became one of the fastest growing Western marketers in the last 20 years. However, one of the reasons that happened was because they were very specific about who they sold to and why. And they organized, because they didn't know how to run a grocery store, they organized it very differently than anyone had done before. Whereas most retail groups, particularly grocery stores, tend to compare unit to unit, one store to another in, say, two major metropoli, Chicago and New York, and see how the performance is going and reward and measure them on that basis. He recognized that the general manager of the store didn't have enough visibility into all aspects of the business. So instead, he measured the company one produce manager to another produce manager, or one deli to another deli manager, because that was the unit of action that allowed them to serve customers well. And they would have really specific metrics, like, did consumers view the mist producer on the produce to be sufficiently hydrating, that things seem fresh and cool and crisp. And so Whole Foods propelled itself by being more exclusive to the audience that it served, and with a more refined set of product at higher prices, because that's what it literally cost them to be able to serve that group. They almost went out of business when they sold themselves to private equity, who immediately started to try and compare them to Kroger's and Myers and other traditional grocers, and wanted to change the metrics because they said, we could margin. And if you turn us into Kroger's, we'll be as unprofitable as they are, because you're going to make us a generalist in a world full of generalist producers. And so he worked behind their back in order to sell out the business to Amazon. And Jeff Bezos, in this case, was a white knight that understood the integrity of what Whole Foods was trying to do, and agreed to both perpetuate it and give it the ability to sell through Amazon, online and beyond. His book, Conscious Capitalism, was a real inspiration for me, because it described his personal journey from going from one mindset as sort of a socialist and trying to do the best for everyone without making a profit, to being a conscious capitalist and using the profit motivation to allow him to serve multiple constituencies, primarily his customers, but also his staff, before he worried about serving his investors. His point being that if I'm going to serve them well, they have to have the same long-term view that I do. And if they're transactional investors and day traders, they're not in the same business I am, and I don't want them, which is why he sold to private equity. To show you another example, you probably recognize this logo. I have to swap out sources to show you a short video. It's a little 1 minute video. Stay with me here for 1 second. Hopefully you'll be able to hear this.
I think one of the things that really separates us from the high primates is that we're tool builders. And I read a study that measured the efficiency of locomotion for various species on the planet. The condor used the least energy to move a kilometer. And humans came in with a rather unimpressive showing about a third of the way down the list. It was not too proud of a showing for the crown of creation. So that didn't look so good, but then somebody at Scientific American had the insight to test the efficiency of locomotion for a man on a bicycle. And a man on a bicycle, or a human on a bicycle, blew the condor away, completely off the top of the charts. And that's what a computer is to me. What a computer is to me is, it's the most remarkable tool that we've ever come up with. And it's the equivalent of a bicycle for our minds.
Okay, we should be back to our slide. That was young Steve Jobs, as you may note. That was an internal video he used for his own people in order to help them understand the ethic of what he was trying to do upon his return to Apple after being excommunicated, and running Pixar next, and the software that powers the Macintosh today. What you witnessed in that internal video was the revelation for Steve Jobs that's about as close as we come to understanding formally what Apple said as the purpose for their organization, which was to create bicycles for the mind. Now, you need to recognize that in 1984, computers looked like this. They were input devices for textual character information in a monochrome screen. And about that same time, he introduced this bicycle for the mind, which was his realization that this calculation engine could actually be a vehicle that allowed you to draw. It would allow you to create in a way that no other tool before had been able to do if we just design it for creating things rather than counting things. And Apple has been in that business ever since. His bicycles for the mind have mobilized so much of everything, including the computer that's probably in your pocket now. If you think about what Apple's doing, his term is creating bicycles for the mind. I'm just going to call it tools for the mind. And the way that they do that, how they do that, is by making complex technology simple. If you have ever been tormented by complex technologies, you'll know that very typically engineers design from their own perspective for engineers. It's a really hard translation to say, hey, you're an expert in this electronic and computational technology. Make it simple enough for a baby to use. And if you've ever seen an infant using an iPad, you'll know that Apple has succeeded in doing so. And the bigger question for these organizations is, why do you go about it? What Apple is attempting to do is use computer power to liberate human creativity, in much the same way that a bicycle liberates you to propel yourself more elegantly than a falcon, because what we've done is we've harnessed your internal gyroscope. We've done like paved roads that we didn't count in the calculus that allow you to be so much more efficient because of all the magic that comes with the brainstem that we get to carry around with us, or really the frontal lobe. So Apple answers all three questions of what you do, how you do it, but most importantly, why you do it. And the thesis here is that people buy why you do things more importantly than what you do or how you do it. But so few people are capable of answering the question of why their work matters. Now, I worked with a guy who, at the age of 17, couldn't afford to go to university. He wanted to be a doctor and eventually afford to go to medical school. He borrowed $1,000, or actually took $1,000 as an investment from his local family doctor, who, as a result, his name was Peter Buck, and they called it Pete's Super Submarines, or Pete's Submarines. And in a day when you advertise by radio, Pete's Submarines sounded like they were selling marine pizzas or something, and people kept showing up for seafood pizzas. So they said, okay, we're going to have to rename it, and they called it Subway. And they franchised it on the same model as McDonald's, and by 1990, they were opening their 5,000th location. Today, they have 40,000 locations around the world, more stores than any other restaurant group, including Starbucks, which seems to be on every corner. They made a few mistakes, like hiring a pedophile as your spokesman, not a great move. And by 2015, their largest market, the US, was beginning to falter. The rest of the world was okay. It was covering all sins by growing in China and India. However, in a franchise model, if you're not growing, you're dying, like really fast, because no one's going to buy into a chain where stores are closing. And because your growth is a proliferation of franchise licensees, that's a death sentence. So I was called in with my team to help them figure out what was going wrong. And it wasn't very hard to do. We went out and talked to customers. What I've learned is that the best way to understand it is to go talk to the lovers who have left you. So let's go talk to your ex-customers who've gone somewhere else. I can tell you everything about what was missing about you and what's terrible today and what they prefer. And we have a video of a young man who was, young. He was a teenager. He was at a Chipotle where we was right, like next door to a Subway restaurant. Asked him what he was. He said, "Oh, he was very excited. He was basically on first date and was waiting for his new partner to arrive. So he wanted to shoo me away." And I asked him if he would consider, if I paid for it, having his date at Subway. And he said, "Subway, gross." And I had this on video that I then played for my client, the executive team, and really distilled for them the essence of what was wrong in their world. And they didn't even view Chipotle as a competitor at the time. If you're a U.S. audience, you're familiar with Chipotle as the sort of Mexican format of Subway. It was the exact same model, but just done newer, fresher, more deliciously, with much higher calorie content, because Subway was still measuring health using a 1980s model of calories rather than food efficacy. So there's much to learn that. And I presented our recommendations to the franchise, a huge gathering of the franchisees in Las Vegas, along with Fred, the founder. And they were all excited about the transformation that was going to take place. And sadly, no sooner than we finished that presentation, Fred, who had been in remission from leukemia, succumbed to that. We all thought he was out of the woods, but all of a sudden it metastasized and he was gone very quickly and far too young, and still a very vital guy. Tragic. And the entire company went into mourning. So for 2 years, they did none of those things that I suggested. And I've got a phone call from the subsequent CEO who said, "Roger, could you come in and just do what you told us to do a few years ago?" I was like, "Well, that's a lot harder than just telling you to do it." But invited me, and they made me the chief marketing officer, largely because my insights were about the consumers and how we needed to serve them better. And that's its own long story. But one of the really interesting things that came out of it for me was stories that no one had ever heard outside of the walls of Subway. They would do an award every year for a franchisee or group of franchisees who'd made the biggest difference in their communities. And the year that this was being awarded, they were talking about the hurricane that had wiped out Puerto Rico, taken out all the power and everything else. And the franchisees who were responsible for developing Puerto Rico, the franchise development agents, they call them, requisitioned boats out of Miami, filled them with Honda generators, the kind of pull generator that you would have in order to provide electricity when there's a power outage, or like for a food truck. And they delivered them to all subways in Puerto Rico. And as a result, Subway was the only place with the lights on at night. And so all the school children went there to study, then hosting school classes at Subway during the day because they were sound. They realized that the staff couldn't wash their clothes, so they did another flotilla of washing machines. Well, then Subway became the laundromat for all of Puerto Rico, and everybody came there to do their laundry. So this remarkable commitment to what was originally the business, but it was really for the employees, then became all of the customers and the communities around. And there were stories like this every year. Remarkable stories, never told outside the four walls of Subway. So one of the things I asked the CEO if I could do is help him answer the question of why the world needs Subway. And we asked that question of any company. Obvious questions are, we exist for growth or profits, or to be able to create better products or services or solutions or experiences. And the fact is that it is never that. Those are just necessary considerations. Consider this girl playing on the tennis courts of Watts in Los Angeles, growing up to become this icon of sports for men and women and the identity of Nike, whose thesis is about winning. They want you to feel as though you are winning when you are competing. They are about the reason they're doing that is because they're trying to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete. And by their definition, if you have a body, you are an athlete. That is a motivation that your employees can get behind, that your customers will be loyal to. They understand that you exist for a purpose that they can relate to. Much the same way, the one person in this group that is not one of the Rolling Stones was the founder of Virgin Records, and then this is a failed attempt to introduce Virgin Cola by driving a tank through Times Square. He failed a lot, by the way, this guy, Richard Branson. He's now taken to the air and ultimately to outer space with his efforts, and owns Virgin properties. If you lived in the UK, you'd know that they have health insurance and phone service and music services, as well as airlines, as well as hotels and cruise lines. Like all of the things that he does, all, however, speak to a particular irreverence that is the way that Branson intends for Virgin to manifest. But the reason is not just to be different or to be a maverick. It's because he recognizes that life is short and we all deserve to feel like the star of our own story. And so Virgin attempts to make you the star of your experience in everything you do with them. And the people who use Virgin religiously will tell you it's because it makes them feel important in a way that their competitors cannot. This young man on stage in Rio was one of the early experimenters with animation, and Walt Disney, to this very day, concludes every day at the Magic Kingdom with a fireworks display because they believe that the end of the day is the highlight of the day for you to be able to take your memories with you. Disney has organized everything around a simple promise to deliver magic. What they're trying to do is recognize that the age of wonder of our childhood that was reinvigorated by animation, like adults in the 1930s would go to a movie theater and see these moving pictures of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and be mystified at how this could be. And he thought we should be able to create magic for children of all ages, because when we do, anything is possible. And we forget that as adults. As the burdens of adulthood weigh us down, we lose this childhood sense of wonder. And so Disney is dedicated to giving you back the wonder of childhood. Those are three examples of very purposeful organizations that have been leaders in their fields for a long time. It's also this notion of being purposeful is very sustaining. So by contrast, you may have seen Simon Sinek describe the golden circles, the three rings I just described, and he compares Apple to this place that was the hotbed of the founding of Silicon Valley, where Mr. Hewlett and Packard decided their company would not be called Packard Hewlett through the flip of a coin. And they built remarkable technologies as engineers who came out of Stanford University. And they were in the business of creating precision calculation instruments. They started with weighing machines, scales, that were of high quality and reliability. But they never answered the question, why is that important? It was just enough that they could, that we could make a better tool. That's not differentiating in the long run. And HP has suffered accordingly, not causality necessarily, but it certainly would matter for HP if they had a higher reason for being. So when I turned to Subway and asked why we exist, I helped them understand that our competitors all said they existed to provide better food. Food that was faster, food that was nutritious, food that was easier to access. None of that is sufficiently compelling. That is literally the definition of a restaurant, for God's sake. That is not differentiated. But when I think about Pete's Submarines and what they were trying to do, it was about creating delicious, affordable food that was available to you anywhere and nearby, as well as delivered to you. But the reason we were doing it was because of what we saw with the franchisees in their communities. That if we can create better choices for our guests, and in fulfilling that, we become better hosts. If we can provide better opportunities for our people, we become better entrepreneurs. And ultimately, if we can provide better lives in the communities in which we live, and it is truly owner-operated in these areas where they live, we can become better neighbors. So the whole thesis of Subway was about, we thrive together. We don't make a profit off you. We don't see the customer as a vehicle for a profit. We see us as a community that we are part of and that we want to help to proliferate its success. So in summary, let me tell you that when I looked at the foundations of societies and the foundations of a successful commercial enterprise, they all actually had 5 elements that made this possible. They declared a purpose. They would then translate that into a promise to the marketplace. Like for Disney, the purpose was to give us a sense of possible. The promise was magic for all their customers. Then there are a series of principles, and Disney's a great one to explore if you're looking for examples of all this, because Disney has very specific principles of how they behave. They describe the front of a house and back of a house like it's a stage. You will be fired immediately if you take off your Minnie Mouse head to have a cigarette while you're walking around in Disneyland. They have a complete underground network of tunnels and inventory locations and facilities for their staff. So everything you do behind the scene is done out of view of customers. And whenever you pop out of the ground like a mouse, in order to engage with the customers, you are on stage and you're in full performance mode. This also trickles down into the kind of people you hire and the way you motivate them, et cetera, and the performance that you measure. So I think of this as asking a series of questions that start with why do we matter, which beget a series of actions that you can do to discover your timeless aspirations, demonstrate your authentic commitment, et cetera. May have just spared you reading a book, because it all really comes down to this simple template that any organization can design for themselves. I thank you very much for your time today. I'm Roger Mader, and I look forward to fielding any questions that you care to offer to Lucie.
Sure. I was also wondering, does anybody want to share a company that fulfills what Roger's talking about? Hopefully you work for one of those companies.
Yeah, they tend to be your favorite companies when you really think about who you love and why you love them.
Does anyone have a question? I don't know about, my example might be Dawn, the liquid for washing dishes.
Yeah, tell us about Dawn.
And it's more expensive than a lot of them. But when I see the advertisements where they're using them on ducklings and other animals who've been injured by oil spills, disasters, and the care that people take. Now, granted, these volunteers are not necessarily employees, but the fact that Dawn is the go-to because it's gentle enough for a duckling makes me buy the product, makes me feel loyal to the product.
I think that's a great example. In fact, Dawn has a dedication. You have to be careful, of course, in terms about whether things are marketing stick versus real, because people can be quite sincere about these things. So, greenwashing, for example. But this one is literal washing, and it was really a great insight that they were ecologically friendly, and they showed, which may have been a happy circumstance, but now they've emphasized it as at the center of their offerings, and now they would cross that threshold at their peril because they've really set themselves apart that way.
Yeah, Megan doesn't have a question, but she appreciates you sharing your insights.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah. Ben is blown away by the Santa Ana winds.
I love that story about Subway. I think anybody who's listening, the story about how the owners, the franchisees behaved in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
Oh, Antonio asked. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to say that I pulled out a particularly trenchant example that came out. Well, it was the award that was given the year that I was presenting, but these have been every year for years. And there's all, and it's not about funding the Little League team. These are about really making a difference in putting out wildfires or housing refugees. Just remarkable stories. And it really is, I think, a testament to the fact that they are owner-operated in their towns. And so these are the people who run a Subway are real entrepreneurs. And one of the things I didn't mention is that Fred, because he was impoverished, and Subway gave him financial liberty, all of his efforts, and part of the reason that Subway got in trouble, were directed at franchisees. He always wanted Subway to be the cheapest point of entry for any new entrepreneur. And so waves of typically immigrants who came to the United States had the opportunity to buy into a franchise model, so they wouldn't have to learn anything from scratch. But the cheapest thing at the time was a 7-Eleven, which would have cost $25,000 for the franchise rights. Subway was $5,000. And on top of that, Subway was basically a salad bar in a hallway. Like all you needed was an outlet. So it was really, really expensive to launch. And then Fred fought tooth and nail with all of us to keep it really cheap. When people started to have toast and sandwiches, he said, no, because my most deprived franchisees can't afford a $400 industrial toaster, so no toaster. Like, wait. We have to be a little responsible for that marketplace. And so there was always this tug of war between serving the customers and making sure we didn't impose costs on the franchisees. But it really because it was so inexpensive as a point of entree and was designed for these first generation entrepreneurs.
It's wonderful. Antonio asks, how would you rate Southwest Airlines, like on that scale?
Well, Southwest has failed recently. Historically, Southwest had a really compelling mission, which was much like Disney used magic as their catchword, theirs was freedom. And what they meant by that was they chose to go into business not to compete against airlines, but to compete against Greyhound. They were trying to make it possible for you to make it to a loved one's wedding or a deceased loved one's funeral that would have been out of reach by airfare standards of the day. This was before airfare was regulated, so there was a lot of it was quite expensive. It was a gift of luck. They chose to make it affordable, And to do that, they competed on the model of a bus route, which was point to point versus hub and spoke, the way all the other airlines operate. And so they had a very small fleet, very limited maintenance requirements because they only had one type of plane, and they flew back and forth between individual sites, which meant they had a very limited portfolio of offerings, but they could do it really inexpensively. They also mobilized their employees to play every role. In traditional airlines, I check you in, that guy handles the bags, and there the two ends shall meet. Not because Southwest recognized that the most important factor in both customer satisfaction and profit was the speed of plane turnaround. How fast you can flip a plane. They just said, it's everybody's job to flip a plane. Whatever. Get hair on fire, go. Get people loaded, get luggage loaded, whatever. And because of that, they're all in together. Pilots doing stuff that they would have never done in any other airline. And so everybody was in it together, including, to some degree, the customers who were doing this tap call approach to floating. But because they were all in it together, it really felt like it was a communal effort to achieve this freedom of low-cost travel. For a very long time, they managed to pull that off successfully.
Great, thanks. I've got another question. What is your advice for companies? Consumers increasingly demand they stand on social justice and other public issues.
We all have a responsibility to the societies in which we operate, to the constituencies and stakeholders we serve. But we're not all responsible to everyone for everything. So companies have to be discerning about what they have chosen to do and deliver. If they're in conflict with the societies in which they operate, they're in real freaking trouble. And so you have to hear it and you have to respond to it authentically. And I would say if somebody wants Southwest Airlines to go out of business because they're burning too much carbon, Southwest should say, I can't achieve my goals of liberating people for the opportunities to travel unless I am able to fly the way we do. And you can like it or lump it, but that's the trade-off that we're making. And I think that kind of authentic response is appreciated, and it will alienate some, and it should, because that's not who you choose to serve.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
My guess is that many off-the-top choices of places to work might have similar stories. Is that true?
That many what places?
Of the top choices, not off the top.
Yeah.
Of the top choices to work have similar stories. Would you say that's true?
I would say that companies have not done a good job of communicating these things often beyond their own employees. So what you'll find is employees can find real meaning in what they're doing, but that it doesn't, like Subway, it didn't make its way into the marketing. So the rest of the world may not know it other than viscerally. They kind of experience it, but it hasn't been trumpeted the way that Dawn successfully did with washing oil-besotted ducks. So I would say that the employees are often the first to know of the power of purpose in an organization, and that it's if it's the reverse, that I'm concerned that it's a marketing shtick. That if only customers are hearing about the value of Dawn as a solvent, but their employees aren't, then they're really not. They're doing it as a marketing strategy and not as a corporate strategy, and it should be understood pervasively so that people are living it and people are choosing to work there for the right reasons, et cetera. I hope that answers your question. The quick answer is yes.
What are some metrics Subway uses to measure their engagement with their neighborhood?
There's three different levels. The main one are the traditional ones that you have for customer satisfaction. Those had kind of been in place, but not really well titrated. One of the things that we did was we recognized that we actually have three kind of unique personas. One is sort of a young family that's both nutrition and cost conscious. Another is young people who are more about cost conscious and and volume. Like I want a $5 footlong. By the way, pro tip: don't put the price of your product in your freaking jingle, because the $5 footlong eventually costs $6 to produce, and people got really upset when it was a $5 half footlong. More importantly, and very few organizations really implement this well, there's a structured, what's effectively a survey for the local community. What kind of impact are we having? How could we help more? What are the key concerns you have for our community, so that we can understand what people are concerned about? And those tend to be very local and measured very locally, because they don't even cross area codes, let alone time zones. So those are very local, and it's just a question of how does the local community view the value of Subway as a community member? Is it a productive participant in the community? And there are a lot of them that fail, often because they're brand new and they're still struggling to get on their feet before they do a good job of thinking beyond the four walls of the store.
Yeah. I think about when I moved to the States, we lived in Hyde Park for 10 years, and the Subway, it was a family-owned Subway, and we'd go there all the time because we had no money. And when I go back to Hyde Park randomly, they're still there, and I walk in, and it's like, remember the show Cheers, where they'd yell, "Norm!"
Yeah.
I feel like that when I go into that Subway.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad to hear that. I have a real soft spot for Subway as a result of all this. So I'm very pleased to hear of their success, and very disappointed when I see them failing, which happens a lot because they're trying to keep the cost down. Sometimes they're just not sweeping the floor enough.
Right. Yeah. Well, this one's very clean, and
good.
The people are sweet. So there's another question. What do you think of 23andMe or some other medical company mission, and why seems very integrated in something like this?
Well, the healthcare industry by default, is operating out of the one professional endeavor that literally has its own oath. In this case, to first do no harm. But much of the work I do with companies is to try and teach them to behave like doctors. And what I mean by that is that rather than prescribe what the customer wants, you need to diagnose what the customer needs. Because very often people will ask for things as blindly as I might go into a physician and say, "Oh, I want Ozempic because I'm overweight," without any understanding of the consequences or the commitment or anything else. And as I say, that's a little bit like being Elvis's doctor or Michael Jackson's doctor, where you're just prescribing whatever the hell the patient wants, which is a really often negative consequence for the patient. So healthcare providers have sort of built in this notion that I'm not just selling to a customer. I have a functional responsibility to a patient. And I find that they tend to be the most aligned. Now you end up with, in any field, you'll end up with thieves and scandals. And so 23andMe isn't the example I'm thinking of. It's the one that was doing the blood testing, where Elizabeth, what's her name, just went to prison. And so despite the fact that that was designed as intended to help to both reduce the cost of and speed the results of blood tests, it was based on a false technology that then was, they hid from view, and it became a Ponzi scheme. So you can never speak broadly of any industry as a whole, but I would say that healthcare in general is the easiest group for me to talk to about purpose, because they often already have it, and it's sort of embedded in the nature of what they're trying to do.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Roger. And thank you, everyone who put in a question or listened in today or is going to listen to the recording. This was really fascinating. And it's funny because I think I spoke with you originally back in the fall or something like that. And so it's a long way to wait. Exactly. Oh, one more. Any metrics of non-survey actions that Subway, the company, the franchisees, and our Subway employees take that illustrate the purpose of Subway you discussed?
Yes. there are questions that can be in a survey, but surveys about as bad a metric device as you can come up with, just because it's so blunt, and you're typically previewing what the answers can be, which is self-limiting by definition. And if you do open-ended, then it doesn't become statistically useful, but it might become more insightful. So let me just say, I don't want to give you a lecture on another subject, but there is a problem that we have, particularly coming out of Northwestern. Those of you who came out of the marketing side, Northwestern is renowned for strategic marketing. And many people come out of a marketing background with the tools of marketing, which involve focus groups and surveys, which are really good for evaluating something that exists, but really bad for being generative. They're evaluative, not generative, which is generating new insights and new possibilities, which are done through the methods of anthropology rather than marketing, which largely means you have to observe human beings like great apes in nature and study their behaviors, because human beings are liars. We will tell you what we think you want to hear. We will tell you what makes us proud of ourselves. We will tell you what might impress the other people in the focus group. And so you get these really skewed responses. Unless you're just asking people, do you like this color or that color? Then you get pretty straightforward responses. If you are asking them about describe the purpose of the organization and your affinity for it, very open-ended, you want to do what I did with that kid and intervene, find them in the act, perpetrating the act of having a sandwich, and have a discussion with them in the context of what they're doing. Starting by, say, what are you doing today? And they might say, oh, I'm having lunch. Or they might say, I'm on the most important formative social event of my life, old man, go away. And those are very different things than functionally I need a bite versus I'm engaging in something really important. And then once you have that context, you can start to understand their choices and the relevance and why. You can do the exact same thing with purpose. Tell me why you care about this place. Tell me why you chose it. This is not the cheapest place. You didn't choose it on price. What did you choose it for? So it's much more observational and interventional with much smaller numbers, not statistically valid, but evaluatively much deeper insight.
One more question, and then
God, you people! Last one.
I know. And then before we go to that question, Kate, formerly Del Priore.
Hi, Kate Del Priore. Yes, I know Kate.
She loves you, which is lovely.
I love her and her kids and her growing brood.
Oh, good. Okay. So how can healthcare companies implement elements of purposeful companies when many people question the motive of pharma companies?
I had the really dubious opportunity to work with the producers of oxycodone, and what you know as OxyContin, Purdue Pharma. Mm-hmm. And they caused a really troubling challenge for me, because I spoke to patients who viewed OxyContin as a life-changing, even life-saving drug. People who were confined to a bed and to a drip for pain, morphine drip for pain relief with a dangerously addictive narcotic, were given the alternative of a pill, a dangerously addictive narcotic, but one that allowed them to be mobile and function in a case of somebody who's terminal, maybe the few remaining days on the planet. And it basically gave them some of their life back. And so there was a strong movement at the time to illegalize OxyContin. And I was really torn, because it was, and this is a little bit like the equally dodgy challenge of gun legislation, because you're like, guns are dangerous when misused. Therefore, no gun should exist. Guns should be regulated in a very specific way, in much the same way. But for prescription pharmaceuticals, they were already judiciously managed. What Purdue is guilty of, as I understand from third-party data, is that behind the scenes, they were promoting what are called pill mills. People would write prescriptions off license in order to sell the drug. they were basically rewarding their reps for volume of sales rather than volume of sales through efficacious application, which creates all kinds of flawed incentives. So I think it's entirely possible to corrupt any system that well-intentioned pharmaceuticals that can save lives can also ruin lives, used injudiciously. And so it becomes the responsibility of the organization and everyone within it to understand their purpose. And in this case, but first do no freaking harm. And they were failing their first principle. But I've worked with Pfizer, I've worked with Regeneron, I've worked with Bristol Myers Squibb. In every case, I've worked with Johnson & Johnson. In every case, I found that they were purposeful in trying to promote human health in the work that they were doing. And so I generally know that I wouldn't want to live without pharmaceuticals. I just don't want to be killed by them either. And so the difference between the two is purposeful management.
Thank you so much, Roger. This was so informative. Man, I'm glad we had you on.
Thank you, Lucie. It's my pleasure.
And yeah, very, not just informative, but engaging, which I love.
In 2 dimensions, but thank you.
It was very engaging. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us today. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kate.
If y'all don't join us, I don't get to do these programs. So thank you. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Go Cats, and take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye.